At the center of the United States lies a city shaped by water, fire, steel, and ambition. It grew from wetlands into a crossroads of commerce, where railroads and rivers carried people and goods across the nation. It became a place where cultures collided, industries thrived, and skylines touched the clouds. This is Chicago, a city that rebuilt itself after disaster, powered the country through industry, and carved out a lasting place as the heart of America. Chicago may not be the nation's capital, but in many ways, it became its crossroads. Rising from swampland on the edge of Lake Michigan, the city grew into a hub where railroads, rivers, industry, and people from every corner of the world converged. It was here that goods flowed, ideas spread, and new forms of culture took root. From rebuilding after the Great Fire to pioneering skyscrapers, from revolutionizing meatpacking to shaping American music, Chicago turned itself into more than just a city. It became the beating heart of the country. And in this video, we'll uncover how geography, innovation, and resilience transformed Chicago into America's crossroads. Comment 1 if you've ever visited Chicago, or comment 2 if it's still on your travel list. Location, location, location. Chicago's story begins with its place on the map. Sitting at the southwestern tip of Lake Michigan, the city occupies one of the most valuable pieces of geography in North America. Few other spots offered such natural connectivity. To the east, the vast Great Lakes stretch toward the Atlantic Ocean, linking the city to Europe through established trade routes. To the west, a short portage between the Chicago River and the Des Plaines River connected to the Mississippi system, eventually flowing south to the Gulf of Mexico. In effect, Chicago was the meeting point of two great watersheds, the St. Lawrence and the Mississippi, making it the hinge that connected America's interior with the wider world. Long before European settlers arrived, Native American tribes recognized the importance of this location. The short land crossing between the Chicago River and the Des Plaines was a critical trade and travel route, allowing goods, ideas, and people to move efficiently across the continent. When the Illinois and Michigan Canal was completed in 1848, this natural advantage became an engineered one, transforming Chicago into a true inland port. Chicago's flat prairie land, once swampy and difficult to settle, also became an unexpected advantage. It provided the perfect foundation for building infrastructure. Railroads, warehouses, factories, and neighborhoods could spread outward with little natural barrier. By the mid-19th century, rail lines radiated from Chicago in every direction like spokes on a wheel, solidifying its reputation as the nation's crossroads. Every major railroad passed through the city, and with them came cattle, wheat, steel, and millions of people. This unique geography didn't just make Chicago a hub of transportation, it made it the economic heart of the Midwest. It became the point where America's natural resources met global markets, where agricultural bounty was processed and shipped, and where industries flourished thanks to the constant movement of goods and people. Railroads made it the crossroads. If geography gave Chicago its start, railroads cemented its destiny. By the mid-19th century, as America pushed westward, the nation needed a central hub to tie its growing regions together. Chicago's location made it the obvious choice. What began as a lakeside port quickly evolved into the beating center of America's rail network, a place where iron rails converged from every direction. The first major line to reach the city was the Galena and Chicago Union Railroad in 1848, followed soon after by others that connected Chicago to St. Louis, Detroit, New Orleans, and the expanding frontier. By the eve of the Civil War, more than a dozen railroads funneled through the city, and by 1900, every major rail line in the country touched Chicago in some way. This spiderweb of steel effectively made Chicago the pivot point of the United States, the place where East met West and North met South. Grain from the prairies of Iowa and Nebraska arrived daily in Chicago's elevators before being shipped east. Cattle and hogs from the Great Plains thundered into the Union stockyards on trains, where they were processed and distributed nationwide. Manufactured goods from New York, Boston, and Philadelphia passed through Chicago on their way to the west. For decades, more rail traffic flowed through Chicago than any other city in the world. But the railroads didn't just carry goods, they carried people. Immigrants arriving on the East Coast often made their way inland by train, and many stopped in Chicago to stay, work, and build new communities. Others continued westward, but nearly all passed through the city, making it a gateway to opportunity. Chicago stations became legendary. Grand Central, Dearborn, LaSalle Street, and especially Union Station, a cathedral of transportation that embodied the city's role as the nation's crossroads. The Meatpacking Empire. If railroads made Chicago the crossroads, meatpacking made it the nation's kitchen. Nowhere else in America did livestock and industry combine on such an enormous scale. At the heart of this empire stood the Union Stockyards, opened in 1865 on the city's south side. Covering more than 300 acres, the yards became the largest livestock market in the world, a place where millions of cattle, hogs, and sheep arrived by rail each year. Here, Chicago revolutionized the way America processed and consumed meat. Using assembly line methods decades before Henry Ford applied them to automobiles, packing plants broke down animals with mechanical efficiency. Workers were divided into specialized tasks, one cutting, another salting, another packing, creating a system that maximized speed and output. This model not only fed a rapidly growing nation, but also reshaped industrial production worldwide. At its peak, Chicago's stockyards handled more than 18 million animals a year. Refrigerated rail cars, another Chicago innovation, allowed fresh meat to be shipped hundreds of miles away without spoiling. For the first time, people in New York, Boston, or even San Francisco could eat beef and pork that had passed through Chicago's packing houses. The city wasn't just feeding itself, it was feeding America. But the empire came with a cost. The working conditions were grueling, and the industry drew sharp criticism. Upton Sinclair's 1906 novel, The Jungle, exposed the dangerous, unsanitary realities of Chicago's meatpacking plants, sparking public outrage and leading to federal reforms like the Pure Food and Drug Act. The story of the stockyards was not only about efficiency and profit, but also about struggle, labor organizing, and the fight for safer workplaces. Still, the Union Stockyards remained a symbol of Chicago's industrial might for more than a century, finally closing in 1971. By then, their legacy was clear. They had transformed how the world produced, distributed, and consumed food. Rebuilding and reinventing. In October 1871, disaster struck. The Great Chicago Fire raged for nearly 3 days, fueled by wooden buildings, dry weather, and fierce winds. By the time it was over, the flames had destroyed more than 17,000 structures, left nearly 100,000 residents homeless, and reduced much of the city to smoldering ash. For many cities, such devastation might have meant the end. But for Chicago, it became the beginning of something even greater. Almost immediately, rebuilding efforts began. Chicagoans refused to see the fire as a final chapter. Instead, they treated it as an opportunity to reinvent their city. Architects, engineers, and investors poured into the region, eager to test new ideas in design and construction. Out of the ashes emerged innovations that would change not just Chicago, but the entire world of urban architecture. One of the city's boldest reinventions was the skyscraper. With land in high demand and steel technology advancing, Chicago became the birthplace of the modern tall building. In 1885, the Home Insurance Building rose 10 stories high, the first structure to use a steel frame. This breakthrough sparked a wave of architectural experimentation that would define the city's skyline and inspire skylines across the globe. But rebuilding wasn't only about height, it was also about planning. The fire highlighted the dangers of unregulated growth, prompting new building codes, fireproof materials, and urban planning efforts that made the city safer and more efficient. The bold vision of Daniel Burnham's 1909 Plan of Chicago laid out wide boulevards, parks, and civic centers, giving the city a sense of order and grandeur that reflected its growing power. Industry and immigration. As Chicago rebuilt after the fire, its economy roared to life with a force that few cities in America could match. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Chicago had become the industrial engine of the Midwest, a place where factories, mills, and warehouses operated day and night. Its position as a rail and shipping hub meant raw materials poured in: iron ore from Minnesota, coal from southern Illinois, grain from the plains, and finished products flowed out to every corner of the nation. Steel mills lined the city's outskirts, machine shops produced tools and equipment, and the stockyards churned out processed meat on an industrial scale. Chicago wasn't just a city, it was a workshop for America. But it wasn't machines alone that powered this transformation, it was people. Chicago became one of the greatest immigrant gateways in the country. Germans, Irish, Poles, Italians, Czechs, Lithuanians, and later Mexicans and African Americans from the South all poured into the city, each group drawn by the promise of jobs and opportunity. They filled the factories, laid railroad tracks, built neighborhoods, and shaped the cultural fabric of the city. Immigrant communities carved out distinct enclaves, Polish churches and bakeries in Avondale, Italian groceries in Little Italy, vibrant Jewish neighborhoods on Maxwell Street, and bustling Mexican communities that took root in Pilsen. Each wave brought traditions, languages, and food, transforming Chicago into one of the most diverse cities in the nation. At the same time, the Great Migration brought hundreds of thousands of African Americans from the rural South to Chicago during the 20th century. They came in search of industrial jobs and escape from Jim Crow laws, settling in areas like the South Side and Bronzeville. These neighborhoods became centers of black culture, politics, and music, fueling movements that would influence the nation. The meeting of industry and immigration wasn't without struggle. Crowded tenements, poor working conditions, and labor unrest were part of daily life. Chicago became a battleground for workers' rights, with strikes, protests, and clashes that shaped the American labor movement. The Haymarket Affair of 1886, for example, highlighted both the power of organized labor and the tensions between workers and industrialists. Culture and influence. Music was one of Chicago's greatest gifts to the world. In the early 20th century, African Americans arriving during the Great Migration brought with them the blues of the Mississippi Delta. In Chicago, those sounds electrified, evolving into the urban blues that would influence rock and roll for decades to come. Later, jazz flourished in the city's clubs, gospel rose from its churches, and house music emerged from its underground dance scene in the late 20th century. Each wave of sound made Chicago not just a city of labor and steel, but a laboratory of rhythm and creativity. Architecture was another sphere where Chicago set the standard. After the Great Fire, the city became the birthplace of the modern skyscraper, forever changing urban skylines. Architects like Louis Sullivan, Daniel Burnham, and later Frank Lloyd Wright pioneered bold new visions of design. The Chicago School of Architecture emphasized steel frames, open space, and form-following function, principles that spread worldwide. Even today, the Willis Tower and John Hancock Center stand as symbols of Chicago's drive to build higher, stronger, and smarter. Politics also shaped the city's influence. Chicago's leaders, from mayors to machine politicians, became notorious for their power and charisma. The Democratic political machine dominated the city for much of the 20th century, influencing elections on both the state and national level. The city also became a stage for pivotal events in American history, from the 1968 Democratic National Convention protests to Barack Obama's rise to the presidency. Chicago's politics, like the city itself, were rough, complicated, and impossible to ignore. And then there's the food. Chicago blended its immigrant traditions into flavors that became icons of American cuisine. Deep dish pizza, Chicago-style hot dogs, Italian beef sandwiches, Polish sausages, all emerged from the city's neighborhoods, reflecting the cultures that built them. Even food became a statement of identity here, hearty, bold, and unapologetically Chicago. From its humble beginnings on swampy ground to its rise as a powerhouse of industry, culture, and innovation, Chicago has always been more than just a city on the map. Its geography made it a crossroads, its railroads turned it into a hub, its stockyards fed the nation, and its people, immigrants, workers, and dreamers, gave it strength and soul. Out of fire, it rebuilt. Out of struggle, it created movements. Out of diversity, it forged a culture that has influenced the world. Chicago may not hold the title of America's capital, but in so many ways, it became the country's beating heart, pulsing with resilience, ambition, and the drive to reinvent itself time and again. It is a city that tells the American story in all its grit and glory. And if you enjoyed this journey through Chicago's past and present, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss more stories about the places that shaped America.